Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Hembar, and today I have a video that I basically just want to talk about one book. Okay, I've done this before, so this is a nonfiction book. I think the last time I did a full video, not just a short, on a nonfiction book was back in January, maybe, for Winters in the World. Um, but today I want to talk about this book here, Old English Tradition. Essays in honor of J.R. Hall, edited by Lindy, Brady. Now, I don't want to take too much time to talk about this, but pretty much, this is an interesting book. I like to study philology. I'm pretty much amateur wannabe at this point, but I am studying it in school for a master's degree. Um, and this stuff is pretty good for that. I mean, also if you're interested in like Anglo-Saxon history, if you want to be like Anglo-Saxonist or whatever, um, then this is actually pretty useful stuff. Now, it does have a few sections actually. So, actually, I've not read anything by J.R. Hall, but this is a festschrift for him. And we do have an introduction, editor's preface, and a bibliography. Um, I I don't really remember much about them, but I remember probably liking them. I started this a couple years ago. It came out in 2021, I think. So the first section is Old English Poetics. The second section is Anglo-Saxon Christianity, so just Christianity from that early English period. I guess mostly focused on Anglo-Saxons rather than Welsh or, Brythonic or whatever. And section 3 is Beowulf. And then we have Codicology, and then we have early Anglo-Saxon studies. And it's particularly these last two that made this really stand out. I mean, the first three sections are great sections. It's just like kind of what you'd expect from something in this Old English tradition. But it's something like codicology, which I find very interesting. It's almost like manuscript studies, kind of like the archaeology of books, right? It is material. So, I mean, and then it also gets into something like paleography. But I just want to kind of go over briefly these articles. So the first one actually I have is to commemorate friendship, the life and times of Old English wina. It's spelled as modern wine, right? Um, and this is a name that means friend, pretty much, right? Or a loved one, kind of. You'll see it in like something like Tolkien's Legendarium. I think there's Elfwine or Alfwine, Elfwina. Edwin, the name Edwin has that win in it, I believe. And it's an interesting one. Actually a very good start to this book, I feel like. And one of the interesting things that I learned at the time reading this, again, that was a while ago, is that it's actually related to the Latin word Venus, which is Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. Um, which makes sense. But it is interesting because it is really only a word used in poetry. It's not really a word you see in more vernacular stuff. It's also one that doesn't survive. I can't think. Maybe the word winsome is technically related, but I'm not sure on that. And then we have Death of the Grim Hunter by Jane Roberts from the University of London. I don't know if I shared that. The first one was by Roberta Frank from Yale University. So this is interesting, just kind of looking at personification of death in some Old English texts. And then we have The Life's Lament and the Poetics of Affect by Catherine O'Brien O'Keefe from the University of California, Berkeley, which is an interesting dive into one of the really two poems I can think of in Old English that are from a woman's point of view. And The Wife's Lament is the more popular one of these. It's one of these elegies that are really popular because they're really stinking good. You should read them, even if you don't read them in Old English, or just read them in Modern English or whatever language you speak. And then the next one is, I believe, so it's Progress in Old English Metrics by Thomas Cable, University of Texas at Austin. Just a good look at meter. So meter is another thing I think that if you're into philology, like you just have to understand the meter rather than looking at not looking at it pretty much, which I feel like is important. And then we have, let's see, the Anglo-Saxon Christianity part. We have Figures of Enoch and Bodley in Library Manuscript Junius 11. It's basically Enoch depictions, which is very interesting. It does give you some of the art as well from the manuscripts. And then we also have Junius manuscript being named after Franciscus Junius, who we'll talk about here in a second. And then we also have Christ 3 and Aperibit Repetina Dies Magna Domini by Frederick M. Biggs, University of Connecticut. And this just kind of looks like at a hymn, supposedly by Bede, and the poem Christ 3, and some similarities there. And then we have The Long Shadow of Alcuin of York, Cambridge Pembroke College 25 by Paul E. Charnock. I'm not sure how to say the name, sorry. But just, chief scholar of Charlemagne's court is Alcuin, of course, who is an Anglo-Saxon. Alcuin is not how you would say his name in Old English, but anyways, that's what he's known by popularly. Then we have the Eucharistic Dance of the Angels in First Canute 4, 1 through 2. And then I'll just share the opening line here, actually, for this one. The Old English laws are the only substantial corpus of early medieval Germanic law preserved in the vernacular and are an important, if enigmatic, source of Anglo-Saxon social history. So it goes into that, and I did find it pretty interesting. Then we next have an edition of 2 Old English homilies, Capital Sims and Lenten Tide. This is Artie Folk, Indiana University, and then, So Artie Folk is a very great philologist who does a really good job of showcasing not just the linguistic side that you need for philology. It's just much more than that, right? So if you want to understand how linguistics, in the sense, in philology are different, in even how historical linguistics is not just the same as philology, then you really need to read folk stuff. Pretty much, he'll make you understand, I think. It's a little harder to explain, though this other book I have does a decent job. But that's not what this video is about. It's not about that book. So this one is Verbal Confusions, chiefly in Beowulf. And it gives you, the subtitle has some Old English verbs I'm sure you don't care about, so I'm not going to read them right now. So basically just some ideas on what these verbs can mean, what they might mean, how they're normally translated and whatnot. Then we have ironic use of lof and 3 swords of doomed inheritance in Beowulf. A very interesting one, actually. It kind of reminds me of a book I've read some of by Edward Pettit, The Waiting Sword. And lof meaning kind of like leaving, it's like a treasure almost, and how these are connected to ill fate in Beowulf, pretty much. And how that also kind of foreshadows at the very end of Beowulf, right? Not maybe the happiest ending. And then Beowulf 374 to 375, problems of interpretation by Hal Chickering from Amherst College. So basically it goes over mostly 2 schools of thought and how to translate this, and how it is rather enigmatic. There are ways to translate it that seem to work, right? Both ways work in a sense, and that's also, again, why I think you would want a philologist answering these questions of a sort. Right, it says even in here, however, Folk's interpretation is not so implausible, right? Because it's Folk. Right? He's considered a lot more things than just the linguistic side of things. And then see. It says he chooses one parsing and then justifies it by self-translation. I have a tendency to go with Folk, so I'm not sure much about Chickering here. I don't really know anything about him, but that's just my opinions on the matter. And then we get to Codicology, which is a very interesting section, actually. So we have this manuscript in the Tranbiel's hand of Worcester, who is a famous guy, actually. He glosses Old English manuscripts, but he was actually from a later period, more the High Middle Ages. And this kind of looks at like what he was maybe looking for, like not just what he was glossing, what text he was glossing, but that he was probably trying to create some handbook for priests or something like that. And then we also have New Light on the Vercelli book, Textual Science and Manuscript Recovery by Gregory Hayworth, University of Rochester. This is maybe my favorite essay in this whole anthology here. Very infuriating, but enlightening. Kind of look at romanticism and how something very bad happened. Like this, and it gets into some of the different I can't think inks you would use for writing in these manuscripts, and how also this nutgall regent used at a certain time to help read these texts, but also you'd end up damaging them more in the end. So very, very, very interesting one. I found this one very interesting. I do not like this Meyer guy at the end, but what can you say? And then this Theophilus ink idea is pretty interesting as well. So I really enjoyed this one. And then we have the enlightened innocence. So this is the very early Anglo-Saxon studies, the last section. Of Franciscus Junius encounters the meters of Boethius. Basically, we have two versions of Old English Boethius. One is prose, one is poetry, but the poetry manuscript, I believe, does not survive. We only have a copy written down by Franciscus Junius, who lived from 1591 to 1677. The Junius manuscript is named after him. He's a friend of John Milton, if you know the guy. And he's Dutch. I believe he lived in Leiden or something like that. But very interesting, very interesting. I like this one. I like learning about this topic, and then Junius, interesting character anyhow. But basically saying that, like, while Junius does a good job with most of his meter, he makes some mistakes somewhere, and basically we should pay more attention to where he could be making his mistakes. And then Lawrence Knoll and the Old English Bede. Knoll Codex, obviously named after this guy. He lived from 1530 to 1570. It's by Carl T. Burkhout, University of Arizona. And the Old English Bede, of course, are later translations of Bede's Ecclesiastical History, which is written in Latin by Bede. So, and then we have Benjamin Thorpe's influence on Joseph Bosworth's editions of the Old English Dictionary, Orosius, in the Gospels, and basically kind of how. So one of the bigger Old English dictionaries we have is the Bosworth Toller. Bosworth is given a lot of credit for it. Toller basically finished it. I think after Bosworth died, as far as I'm aware. But then that supposedly Bosworth got a lot of his information actually from this Benjamin Thorpe, which I didn't know about at all actually before reading this. So it's very enlightening. Shows how much I still have to learn, even though I've been reading this stuff for a while. Anyways, who wrote the non-racist? I'm not in. I don't feel like I'm in the club. Like I feel like there's the people who automatically like know most of the stuff I have to read about, and it takes me forever, and I have to think about it. And yeah, I'm just like the dumb guy over here who acts like I kind of know what I'm talking about, maybe, but I don't actually know what I'm talking about. We have a really short essay, which is very fascinating, one of my favorites as well. Who wrote the non-racist essay, The Anglo-Saxon Race, Longfellow, 19th Century American Anglo-Saxonism. And it looks at kind of the racism of some earlier works, arguably the first philological Old English work of Klipstein's in North America, Lewis F. Klipstein, and how he kind of falls into this very American idea of racism at the time, right? This is shortly before the Civil War, about how, the Anglo-Saxon race is just bound to be great because it's just, genetically awesome or something like that, right? And he kind of says that. And so this essay is actually not philological at all. The author responds to Klipstein, but doesn't actually look at the philology. Which the philology is actually okay, because Klipstein his work is actually pretty much a big old copy. He committed plagiarism essentially, but that's another topic, I guess. But basically, this guy he describes Alfred the Great, right, as a great like Anglo-Saxon, for example, or stuff like that. And he this author, who's anonymous, but we're pretty sure it's Longfellow. It seems like it's Longfellow. He explains his reasoning in here. Seems pretty convincing. He says a typical man of the human race through all time, and then he says that is to say a type of the good man, the man most worthy of emulation. The implications of the author's use of the phrase the human race as opposed to the Anglo-Saxon race are quite clear. I think, yeah, it's very interesting. And you get an interesting idea of Longfellow as well, which is some things I didn't know about, honestly. Longfellow and this early like Old English stuff and Anglo-Saxon stuff, and also like his take on like Catholicism from coming from like a American Protestant point of view, especially from that era. Very interesting. So, anyways, I would recommend if you can get a hold of this. I can't even remember how much this cost. I do remember thinking it was a little expensive when I found a copy of this a while ago. It is from ACMS, ACMRS, I think, Arizona Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, who published great material. And this is one of them. So I would recommend it if you can get a copy of it, of course. So anyways, let me know your thoughts on it, if you want to read it or not. And yeah, anyways, just trying to help out, get some stuff out there that probably almost never gets YouTube coverage and stuff I really enjoy reading. So anyways, I'll see you next time.